Hey everybody, so I'm here to talk to you about this new book that came out, written by former National Security Advisor John Bolton. This was the fourth administration he's worked in, so he's pretty knowledgeable about national security and foreign policy. But it was kind of a controversial book, so I'm about 1/3 of the way through it, so I took some notes and I'll just share with you some of the highlights out of the first third of the book that I've read. So I'll start by saying that now John Bolton said that when Trump became president, he was surrounded by an excess of adults, but over time they departed and he became surrounded by yes men. Bolton said Trump believed he could run the executive branch and establish national security policies on instinct, relying on personal relationships with foreign leaders. Bolton said he entered the existing chaos, seeing problems that could have been solved in the administration's first 100 days but were still lingering. What happened on one day on a particular issue often had little resemblance to what happened the next day or the day after. Another thing that kind of kept popping up in the book was Jared Kushner, the son-in-law to Trump, the one he's married to Ivanka Trump. But it's just by reading this book, it just kind of shows how Jared Kushner was kind of meddling in everything, whether it was his Middle East plan or what. Jared Kushner seemed to have to get involved in everything, and which kind of Bolton and Jared Kushner's not qualified for that. So, but anyways, moving on from Jared Kushner, Bolton was always meeting at the White House and giving advice even before he became National Security Advisor. So that was an interesting thing. I noticed that, before he didn't become National Security Advisor till the 16th month of the administration, but most of the time he was kept going to the White House. He was being invited to be in meetings, and they were asking his advice on this and that, including Trump was asking his advice. So it kind of like he was kind of, in a way, an advisor already. Trump was just one time in one of these meetings that Bolton was invited to, and again, he wasn't part of the administration yet. Trump started discussing how irritated he was with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and he started discussing firing Tillerson with Bolton and Chief of Staff Kelly, and was wondering if they could get enough votes in the Senate to confirm Bolton as his replacement. And they kind of right away, like Kelly, right away they were pretty certain there was no way they could get enough votes in the Senate to confirm Bolton as Secretary of State. But Kelly pointed out that he could be appointed National Security Advisor without this confirmation process. And so everyone's eyes lit up because they kind of all knew that's what direction they would head. After a meeting with Trump, Kelly and Bolton, again, Kelly is the White House Chief of Staff. He's a former Marine general. That's John Kelly. So after a meeting with Trump, Kelly and Bolton, the meeting was on North Korea and Iran. Kelly told Bolton, keep pounding away in public with regards to exiting the Iran nuclear deal and taking a harder line on Iran. So in other words, again, Bolton wasn't a member of the administration yet, but Kelly was telling him, keep pounding away on this in public, because Bolton was always appearing on news shows. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly told Bolton that Trump despised both Bush presidents and their administrations. Kelly also said that Trump changed his mind constantly. UK Foreign Secretary at the time, Boris Johnson, who is now the Prime Minister, he called Jared Kushner to let him know that the UK would support and participate in a US-led military response to Syria attacking its own people with chemical weapons, which is a good thing. But again, why is he calling Jared Kushner? That's strange. I mean, Bolton said United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley would call to ask what to say in the Security Council. She would do this on a normal basis to learn what to do in the Council, which is completely outside of the regular National Security Council process. And he basically said she was woefully not qualified for her job. After the April 7th, 2018 chemical weapons attack by Assad in Syria, Defense Secretary Mattis presented several options in response by the United States, but Bolton said that Mattis was a classic bureaucrat, putting forth a classic bureaucratic ploy, structuring the options and information to make only his options look acceptable in order to get his way. Bolton also said Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin strongly backed Mattis, although Mnuchin manifestly had no idea what he was talking about. Nikki Haley On another occasion, Nikki Haley mistakenly announced new Russian sanctions, even though the United Nations ambassador has no role in this, and that's Treasury's job, and they hadn't planned these new sanctions, so Haley made a big mistake. Bolton, on another occasion, said that in regard to pulling out of the Iran deal, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin insisted he needed 6 months to get the sanctions back in place. Bolton thought that they could just reimpose sanctions effective immediately with a 3-month grace period for businesses to adjust. Bolton said, no wonder Iran, North Korea, and other countries were so good at evading sanctions. They had plenty of time to get ready under Mnuchin's approach. Bolton's South Korea counterpart, Chung Eui-young, is the director of their National Security Office. That's Bolton's counterpart in South Korea. And he is the one who suggested to North Korea's Kim Jong-un that he invite Trump for a summit. The South's motivation was its unification agenda. So again, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, his counterpart in South Korea, named Chung Eui-young, he is the one that came up with the idea for there to be a summit with Trump and Kim Jong-un. So it wasn't Kim Jong-un, North Korea's idea, it was the Director of National Security Office for South Korea. He's the one that proposed Kim Jong-un, hey, you should invite Trump to a summit. I didn't know that. Probably most of you didn't either. North Korea, now, the U.S. of course wanted North Korea to denuclearize, to shut down its nuclear program. One of the criteria of that is that you close your sites, your testing sites. Well, Kim Jong-un said the nuclear test site named Punggye-ri, the closure would only be attended by journalists and not nuclear experts, known U.S. site inspections including the tunnels. The only thing that could be done were soil samples afterward by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and that's not a good substitute. So, like Bolton said, you need to inspect these sites beforehand with experts, and then also inspect them afterward. That way you can measure what happened. Was there a significant reduction? Did they do stuff, or was there no change? So it was Bolton was beginning to see quickly, and Pompeo, the Secretary of State, saw quickly that Kim Jong-un wasn't really going to shut down his nuclear program. He was just stalling, and he was going to try and get stuff out of the U.S. without anything in return. Now, the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, at one point told Bolton, "You can't imagine how desperate I am to get out of here," meaning the White House. He said, "This is a bad place to work, as you will find out." Now, Bolton said that in Singapore, Trump said he wanted to get out of Singapore, and again, Singapore was the site of the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. And he wanted to get out of Singapore before the Norse advance team got there, because they were late and there was possibly going to be a no-show. But here's what Trump said after that to Bolton. Trump then told Bolton that with the women he had dated in the past, that he never liked to have them break up with him. He always wanted to be the one doing the breaking up. Chief of Staff Kelly said this was very revealing about Trump. He, had to be in control. Now, Bolton said Trump had intelligence briefings every week from the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, CIA Director Gina Haspel, and other briefers. Bolton said, "I didn't think these briefings were terribly useful, and neither did the intelligence community, since much of the time was spent listening to Trump rather than Trump listening to briefers." Bolton said he made several tries to improve the transmission of intelligence to Trump, but failed repeatedly. Trump invited Kim Jong-chol. Now, this is not Kim Jong-un, this was another Kim named Kim Jong-chol. Trump invited him to the White House to have a meeting in the Oval Office, but Pompeo, Bolton, and Kelly were against that. Kim Jong-chol is the director of North Korea's Reconnaissance General Bureau, which is a North Korean intelligence agency that manages the state's clandestine operations. Kim Jong-chol is also vice chief of the Korean People's Army, and he's also a general. He met with Pompeo in New York City, and then the diplomatic security drove him to the White House to meet with Trump and deliver a letter from Kim Jong-un. Bolton said Kim Jong-chol is a brutal killer and the one likely person responsible for the fatal torture of American Otto Warmbier. Only Pompeo was allowed in the Oval Office during the meeting. Pence and Bolton were not allowed, and Kelly said he was shocked by this. In reference to the Kim Jong-un summit, Trump said he had known from his first day in office that for him, deal making or negotiating such as this summit would be easy. Kim Jong-un, according to Bolton, tricked Trump when he said he needed to build public support for denuclearization because there are many hardliners in his country against it. And then this is a kind of a joke because, Kim is the supreme leader. He's a dictator. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't need permission from anybody. But Bolton said he tricked Trump because he said the hardliners were always against the military exercises that South Korea and the United States held in the waters around South Korea. And so he said to build public support for denuclearization, he wanted to reduce or even eliminate the U.S.-South Korea joint military exercises, which Trump agreed to do right away, saying they were a waste of money and provocative. He said he would override his generals who could never make a deal. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said that 6 months prior to this summit, Trump had also almost canceled the exercises because Russia and China complained about them. Bolton said this was disturbing to hear. In preparations for Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin, the choices of places to meet were down to two choices. Russia wanted Vienna and the US wanted Helsinki. Bolton said that Trump didn't want Helsinki and asked, isn't Finland kind of a satellite of Russia? And then later on, Trump asked Chief of Staff Kelly if Finland was a part of Russia. Trump told them, just tell Russia we'll take Vienna, we'll do whatever the Russians want. But eventually, they convinced Trump to go with Helsinki. Prior to the Helsinki meeting, Bolton flew to Russia to meet with several dignitaries, including President Putin. When they discussed the Ukraine, Putin said that Obama told him in 2014 that if Russia went no further than annexing Crimea, the Ukraine confrontation could be settled. Obama then changed his mind. Bolton said Putin was totally in control, calm, self-confident, and that he was totally knowledgeable on Moscow's national security priorities. Bolton said he was not looking forward to leaving Putin in a room with Trump alone. Obama criticized NATO members for being free riders, not spending adequately on their own defense budgets. So this is actually something that Obama and Trump were on the same page about. It's just Trump pushed on this subject much further than Obama, but they both were in agreement because Obama criticized NATO members as well. In Cardiff, Wales, in 2014, NATO members committed to spend 2% of their GDP on defense by the year 2024. Trump criticized Germany's 1.2% expenditure of their GDP. Trump, he told the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg that they were going to just reduce their expenditure to Germany's level, but Bolton said that Trump was confused because that would mean we would slash, because we spend 4% of our budget, 4% of GDP on defense. So if we were going to slash from 4% to 1.2% like Germany, that'd be a 70% reduction in defense spending, which is not going to happen. And so Bolton said Trump was confused. Bolton, because there's a what they call a NATO contribution fund, because NATO's annual budget is about $2.5 billion, and so all the NATO members contribute to this fund. And I believe that at the time the U.S. was contributing 22% to this fund. 22% of the overall budget. In Cardiff, Wales, so anyways, Bolton said NATO Secretary General John Stoltenberg. So first of all, the National Security Advisor John Bolton had a private phone call with the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, and he said the access of adults that were in the White House were mostly gone now, and they had frustrated Trump, so he was now determined to do what he wanted to do on several issues, no matter what his current advisors told him. At one point in the NATO meeting, Trump was going off and getting really upset at Stoltenberg about the countries not paying their share. And it got to the one point where Bolton said that Secretary of Defense Mattis turned to him and quietly said, "This is getting pretty silly." Trump, in Trump's meeting with Putin, they had a press conference afterwards. Putin said it's not Russia that's meddling in the elections. And Trump said, "I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be Russia. I have confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong in his denial today." Then after that, the director